The Jehovah's Witnesses have long prided themselves on their ability to take an everyday metaphor and spin it into something seemingly profound. In the November 2025 JW broadcasting, disguised as a wholesome lesson about spiritual hunger, Geoffrey Jackson draws on the universal human experience of feeling hungry, then pivots sharply into a sermon about feeding one's spiritual appetite through study, meetings, and preaching. Now, the talk seems benign, even uplifting. Who would object to the idea of nurturing one's inner self or finding meaning beyond material pursuits? However, underneath that polished tone and biblical references lies a well-crafted psychological mechanism, a subtle but powerful form of spiritual manipulation that masquerades as nourishment.
Have you ever been so busy or engrossed in a project that you suddenly experience an intense feeling in your stomach? What is it? Yes, it's probably hunger. Your body is telling you that it's time to eat. That's a normal feeling, one that we all are familiar with. Hunger alerts us to the need to eat. Without it, we could perhaps neglect our physical need for food, which could lead to serious problems. Unfortunately, today, hundreds of millions of people can't satisfy their hunger properly because of a lack of food or resources. For them, hunger is a constant problem. But whatever our situation, we all agree that hunger alerts us to a basic need, the need for food. There's another essential type of hunger that most people on this planet are totally unaware of. What is it? Jesus spoke about it when he was very hungry. It was just after his baptism. Let's read the account found at Matthew 4, verses 1 through 4. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit up into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he felt hungry. And the tempter approached and said to him, "If you are a son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man must live not on bread alone, but on every word that comes from Jehovah's mouth." Jesus recognized that while we need physical food, our primary concern should be to satisfy our spiritual need. This includes having a desire to know God and to seek his approval.
Now, the talk begins innocently enough. Have you ever been so busy or engrossed in a project that you suddenly experience an intense feeling in your stomach? It's a rhetorical question designed to disarm. Geoffrey Jackson establishes rapport through a shared human experience, hunger, and then draws a parallel between physical and spiritual hunger. This is an age-old rhetorical device. Start with something everyone agrees on, and then smuggle in theology through emotional association. But notice what happens next. The speaker subtly shifts from talking about our natural human needs to asserting that we all possess a spiritual hunger that can only be satisfied by coming to know Jehovah God. It's a clever bait and switch. And this rhetorical strategy is fundamentally disingenuous. It presumes that philosophical questions about meaning and purpose can only be answered through their specific theological framework, specifically through knowing Jehovah God. The problem isn't encouraging spiritual reflection. That's valuable. The problem is the false dichotomy presented. Either accept our answers or remain spiritually starving. This is textbook high control group messaging, creating a manufactured need that only they can fulfill. And perhaps most hypocritical is the extended section warning against spiritual eating disorders.
But let's discuss for a few minutes some of the problems that may develop without our realizing it. These problems involve what we might call eating disorders. What types of spiritual eating disorders might we experience? We could gradually lose our spiritual appetite. We could become so busy that we neglect to feed ourselves spiritually every day. And we could be eating, but doing so quickly without getting the proper nutrition. How is your spiritual diet? Do you consistently feed yourself spiritually every day? Have your study habits become a little routine, perhaps even forced? Have you become like those who gulp down some food because they know they need to eat? Remember, spirituality is a personal possession, a quality that takes time to cultivate. No one can eat for us. We must do this ourselves. How can we strengthen our spiritual appetite? Of course, we know the basic things that will help us: personal study and Bible reading, meetings, preaching, and prayer. But in addition to these basic things, what else can we do to improve our spiritual appetite? Let's consider a few scriptures that will help us. First of all, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. As newborn infants, form a longing for the unadulterated milk of the word, so that by means of it you may grow to salvation, provided you have tasted that the Lord is kind. Yes, we need to develop a longing for spiritual food. Notice how this verse finishes. Provided you have tasted that the Lord is kind. We can develop this longing by taking time to enjoy the flavor and the taste of each rich morsel. Rather than mechanically reading or passively listening to spiritual food, we should take the time needed to analyze what we're reading or listening to. A good way to do that is to write down the beautiful thoughts that we come across while enjoying our spiritual food.
And your study habits become a little routine, perhaps even forced? Now, this would be touching concern if it weren't coming from an organization known for prescribing exactly such routines. Jehovah's Witnesses maintain rigorous schedules of meetings, door-to-door ministry, and personal study. Members who reduce their participation are viewed as spiritually weak. The very regimentation the organization imposes creates the mechanical spirituality it claims to deplore. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They warn against gulping down spiritual food mechanically, while simultaneously requiring adherents to consume a steady diet of organization-produced literature, attend multiple weekly meetings, and demonstrate their spirituality through quantifiable ministry hours. Therefore, the spiritual food being offered is not genuine nourishment. It's prepackaged rations designed to maintain loyalty. The metaphor of food becomes ironic here. Jehovah's Witnesses are not being fed. They are being force-fed. Spirituality is a personal possession, the video asserts. No one can eat for us. Yet, this supposed emphasis on personal spiritual cultivation rings hollow when examined against Jehovah's Witnesses' actual practices. Members are discouraged from pursuing independent Bible study or drawing conclusions that differ from official Watchtower doctrine. Higher education, which might facilitate the kind of deep thinking about why we are here that the video celebrates, is and has been actively discouraged, although that's changed in recent years. And Geoffrey Jackson encourages writing down beautiful thoughts and reviewing notes, framing this as personal spiritual growth. But whose thoughts are these really? In practice, these would be thoughts derived from Watchtower publications, not independent theological exploration. This isn't cultivating a personal spiritual appetite. It's creating the illusion of one while feeding members a controlled diet. If you are not spiritually satisfied, the problem is with you, not with the food we provide. In other words, if a witness feels spiritually empty, bored, or disillusioned, it cannot be because the teachings are repetitive, fear based, or intellectually shallow. It must be because they are not studying enough, praying enough, or appreciating enough. Even the concept of losing your appetite becomes a form of guilt induction. It's not framed as a natural phase of questioning or growth, it's a sign of spiritual illness. The believer is conditioned to see doubt as dysfunction. The hypocrisy is almost poetic. The organization that tells followers to expand their choices of spiritual food is the same one that bans reading material it deems apostate.
Deuteronomy 8 verse 3 also helps us to improve our spiritual appetite. He humbled you and let you go hungry and fed you with a manna, which neither you had known nor your fathers had known, in order to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every expression from Jehovah's mouth. As stated in this verse, we need to live by every expression or word that comes from Jehovah's mouth. This may mean that we need to expand our choices of spiritual food. Perhaps we find some parts of the Bible not as appealing as others, parts containing history and prophecy. Why not challenge yourself to taste and test out those parts of God's Word as well? Those sections of the Bible are put there for us too. You might find that if you put in just a little extra effort to study or feast on these more difficult parts of the Bible, you'll come across some super delicious delicacies that will enhance your longing for spiritual food.
They are forbidden from exploring religious ideas outside the Watchtower's literature. Critical thinking, previously higher education, and open theological discussions are discouraged or even vilified as dangerous worldly thinking. So when Geoffrey Jackson says, why not challenge yourself to taste and test out these parts of God's Word as well? It's not a genuine invitation to intellectual exploration. It's a controlled experiment within the confines of the organization's interpretive monopoly. Members are not free to test ideas. They are only free to rediscover Watchtower approved conclusions in new biblical packaging. The governing body claims to be the faithful and discreet slave that dispenses food at the proper time. In other words, they have declared themselves the only legitimate spiritual chefs. Everyone else is forbidden from cooking. So when Geoffrey Jackson says, feed yourself spiritually every day, what they really mean is consume what we've prepared for you daily without questioning the recipe. And that is not feeding oneself. That is being fed. Geoffrey Jackson's tone is warm, reflective, and even poetic. Phrases like enjoy the flavor, delicious delicacies, and beautiful meal are designed to evoke comfort and belonging. But this emotional language conceals the transactional nature of the relationship. The meal is conditional. The food is rationed. The nourishment comes only if the believer remains obedient, attends meetings, and participates in preaching. There is no freedom to explore spirituality outside of the organization's boundaries without being labeled spiritually weak or removed from the organization. In this sense, the talk uses the language of care to enforce control. And one of the most revealing analogies in the talk is the cell phone battery.
Notice that we need to be renewed from day to day. So taking in spiritual food needs to be done daily. Impossible? No. Let's illustrate. Most of us have a cell phone that we usually need to recharge at some point during the day, perhaps when we're not working. If we don't recharge the phone, we all know what will happen. It's frustrating when we want to use our phone and the battery is dead. It can even be dangerous in an emergency. The same is true when it comes to keeping our spiritual batteries charged. So when it's time to recharge your phone, why not ask yourself, have I also recharged myself spiritually today?
Mr. Jackson warns that if we fail to recharge spiritually, we'll end up like a dead phone, useless, powerless, and cut off. It's a metaphor steeped in fear. What they are really saying is, without the organization, you cannot function. This mirrors one of the most damaging psychological messages Jehovah's Witnesses instill from childhood, that spiritual life, and by extension, moral worth, depends entirely on constant connection to the watchtower. Members who leave often describe the resulting emptiness, not because they lack spiritual food, but because they've been conditioned to believe that there is no food anywhere else. An additional level of hypocrisy is the disproportionate focus on spiritual feeding while ignoring or minimizing urgent physical realities such as actual hunger and suffering in the world and within their ranks. The organization's message, as summed up, encourages members who may enjoy material sufficiency to feel spiritually starved without addressing broader humanitarian concerns. This selective attention evokes insensitivity and detachment from real world problems. If a person leaves or disagrees, they are branded spiritually dead, shunned by family, ostracized by friends, and condemned as apostate. Their physical needs, which are basic human rights, are not even met. So much for eating without money and without cost. Jehovah's Witnesses love to quote Isaiah 55, "Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost." Yet the cost of partaking in their spiritual food is total obedience and loss of individuality. The price is paid not in dollars, but in freedom,